In 1997, two microphones 3,000 miles apart caught the same cry rising from the South Pacific, louder than a blue whale, louder than anything alive had ever been recorded, and it climbed in pitch, the way a voice does, from water too deep and too dark for anyone to look. These are the mysteries the ocean gave up, and the ones it still keeps. Section 1. The Bloop and the Voices in the Deep. The date was in the spring of 1997, and the place was a stretch of the South Pacific Ocean, so remote that the nearest land was thousands of miles in almost any direction. There were no ships nearby, no research vessels, nobody watching. What was listening was a network of underwater microphones, devices called hydrophones, that the United States had left scattered across the seafloor. They had been placed there during the Cold War for a very specific purpose, to listen for the movement of Soviet submarines. And long after that purpose had faded, they kept doing what they were built to do. They kept listening. And on one ordinary day, spread across sensors that sat nearly 3,000 miles apart from one another, they all caught the same thing. It was a sound. A single, powerful, low-pitched sound that rose out of the deep and swelled for about a minute before fading back into silence. When scientists at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the American agency that studies the oceans and the atmosphere, later reviewed the recording, they gave it a name that did not match its strangeness at all. They called it the bloop, because that is more or less what it sounded like when they played it back at speed, a sort of wet, rising, gulping noise. The name was almost a joke. What lay behind the name was anything but. The reason the bloop unsettled the people who heard it comes down to two facts, and they sat together in a way that was hard to reconcile. The first was how loud it was. The sound had been picked up by hydrophones separated by roughly 3,000 miles of open ocean, and for a sound to travel that far and still register clearly on sensors that far apart, it had to be extraordinarily powerful. When researchers compared it to the sounds made by known animals, the bloop dwarfed them. It was several times louder than the loudest creature ever recorded, the blue whale, an animal that can grow to nearly 100 feet long and whose calls can already travel across an entire ocean basin. Whatever made the bloop, if it was alive, would have to be far louder than the largest animal that has ever existed. The second fact was the shape of the sound. Its acoustic profile, the pattern it made when scientists looked at it on a spectrogram, a kind of visual graph of sound, resembled the profile of a living thing. It rose in pitch over the course of that minute, the way a biological vocalization rises, the way a call or a cry has structure and movement rather than the flat, mechanical signature of a machine. That was the part that fed the imagination. A sound too loud to come from any known animal, yet shaped like the voice of one. The early scientist most associated with the recording, a NOAA researcher named Christopher Fox, did not believe the source was man-made. It did not sound like a submarine. It did not sound like a bomb. It sounded like something else, and no one could say what. Into that gap, as always happens with a mystery this clean, the theories rushed in. The one that took hold most firmly, the one that spread the widest and lodged deepest in the public imagination, was the idea of a creature. If the sound was shaped like an animal call, but was far too loud for any animal known to science, then perhaps the answer was an animal that science did not know, something enormous, something living in the deepest, darkest, least explored parts of the ocean, a place humans have barely visited, producing a call so powerful it crossed thousands of miles of water. The idea fit neatly with an old and durable human fear, the fear that the deep sea hides things we have never seen, monsters the size of which we cannot guess, moving through the dark far below where any light reaches. It did not help, or perhaps it helped a great deal, depending on how one looks at it, that the location where the bloop seemed to originate fell not far from a place that already carried a heavy weight in fiction. The rough coordinates pointed to the remote South Pacific, and a certain strain of horror writing had long placed a sunken, monstrous presence somewhere in those southern waters. The overlap was a coincidence, a matter of geography and story lining up by chance, but it gave the bloop a second life, a cultural one, in which the sound became evidence, in the minds of some, of exactly the kind of vast sleeping thing that stories had warned about. The recording was real. The creature was not, at least not as far as anyone could ever show. But the pairing was irresistible, and it carried the bloop far beyond the world of ocean science and into the wider imagination, where it has stayed ever since. The truth, when it came, arrived slowly and quietly, the way scientific answers usually do, without the drama of the question. Noah did not simply guess at an explanation. In the years after the recording, researchers kept studying the sounds of the Southern Ocean, and they kept adding equipment. To better understand the noises coming from the far south, the agency's Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory placed additional hydrophone arrays closer to Antarctica, and between roughly 2005 and 2010, teams conducted acoustic surveys in the waters near the frozen continent, in places like the Bransfield Strait and the Drake Passage. What those surveys revealed was that the Southern Ocean is not quiet at all. It is full of sound, and one of the loudest, most common sources of natural sound down there is ice. Ice, it turns out, is enormously noisy. When a great mass of ice fractures, when an iceberg cracks and splits away from a glacier, when a berg drags its underside across the seafloor or grinds against the rocky bottom, it produces sound, and not small sound. These events, sometimes called icequakes or cryoseisms, can generate acoustic signals of tremendous power, powerful enough to be detected across thousands of miles of ocean, exactly the kind of range that had made the bloop seem so impossible. When researchers compared the spectrograms of these icequakes to the spectrogram of the bloop, they matched. The rising shape, the profile that had looked so much like a living core, was the signature of ice breaking apart on a colossal scale. The amplitude, the sheer loudness that no animal could account for, made perfect sense for an event involving a mass of ice larger than a building or a city. The NOAA program that studied these sounds attributed the bloop to a large icequake. The most likely source, in the agency's assessment, was ice breaking up somewhere in the Antarctic region, an iceberg fracturing or scraping the seabed with enough force to send that single, minute-long note out across the Pacific to be caught by sensors thousands of miles away. In 2012, an oceanographer named Robert Diak and his team stated the conclusion plainly, tying the bloop to the collapse and cracking of a huge block of ice near Antarctica. The monster of the deep, the vast unknown creature, was in the end a mountain of ice, doing what ice does when it breaks. It would be easy to treat that as the end, a mystery raised and then flattened. But the honest picture is more interesting than that, because the bloop was never the only sound. The same hydrophone networks that caught it had been catching strange noises for years, and each one carried its own small chill before it was, in most cases, explained. There was a sound recorded in early 1999 that researchers nicknamed Julia, a long, groaning, almost cooing noise that lasted well over 2 minutes and was heard across the equatorial Pacific. For a while, Julia sat in the same category as the bloop, unexplained and eerie. In time, NOAA came to believe it too was most likely the sound of a large Antarctic iceberg, one that had run aground on the seafloor and was scraping and shuddering against the bottom, its enormous weight dragging out that long, mournful groan. There were others. A sound called the upsweep, first detected when NOAA's equatorial listening system began recording in 1991. A noise that rises and falls in a seasonal rhythm, appearing and strengthening at certain times of year, thought to be linked to underwater volcanic activity, far from any observer. There was a sound called slow down, a long descending tone that stretched over several minutes, its falling frequency prompting speculation and, again, a probable explanation rooted in ice, an iceberg slowly grinding to a halt against the seabed. There was a sound called the whistle, caught in the summer of 1997, similar in character to noises made by underwater volcanoes in the Pacific, though it carried a frustrating limitation. Locating the source of a sound in the ocean requires at least 3 separate instruments to record it, so that the origin can be triangulated. The whistle was picked up on only one hydrophone. That meant no one could ever say for certain where it came from, only that it might have traveled a great distance from some volcano before it reached the single sensor that heard it. The pattern across all of these is worth sitting with, because it says something about the deep sea that is both reassuring and unsettling at once. On the reassuring side, nearly every one of these sounds, given enough time and enough equipment, turned out to have a natural explanation. Ice, volcanoes, the seafloor itself shifting and cracking. The ocean is not full of monsters roaring across the dark. It is full of geology and weather and physics, processes so large and so far from human eyes that they can sound, at first, like something alive. The deep is strange, but its strangeness has, again and again, resolved into the ordinary machinery of a very large planet doing what it does. On the unsettling side, the resolution took years, sometimes more than a decade, and it required listening posts left over from a war, and it depended on being lucky enough to have enough sensors in the right places. The sounds were real long before the explanations were. For years, the bloop was simply out there, recorded and unexplained, a loud voice from a place no one could see, and for those years the only honest answer was that nobody knew. That is the real texture of a deep-sea mystery. Not that the ocean is full of things that can never be explained, but that it is so vast, so dark, and so lightly observed that things can go unexplained for a very long time, sitting in the record as open questions while the world waits for the equipment and the patience to catch up. And not every question has been closed even now. Among the sounds still discussed by researchers is one nicknamed the Western Pacific Biotwang, a strange, complex noise recorded in the waters near the Mariana Trench, the deepest place in the ocean. Unlike the bloop, this one is thought to be biological, most likely a call made by a type of baleen whale, though the details of it, the full picture of which animal makes it and why, have taken scientists a good deal of effort to work out, and pieces of it remain the subject of study. The ocean is still handing over sounds that take years to understand, still producing voices in the dark that the people listening cannot immediately name. The deepest lesson of the bloop is not about the ice that made it. It is about what happens in the space between a sound and its explanation. For a stretch of years, humanity had in its possession a recording of something it could not identify, a noise louder than any living creature, shaped like a call, rising from the most remote water on Earth. In that space, the mind did what the mind does. It reached for the largest, most frightening possibility it could imagine, a vast unknown animal in the abyss, and it held on to that possibility with a grip far stronger than the evidence ever justified. The ice was always the more likely answer, but the creature was the more satisfying one, and satisfaction, not likelihood, is what drives a mystery into legend. What the hydrophones proved, in the end, is that the deep sea does not need monsters to be frightening. A block of ice, breaking apart in a place no human has ever stood, can produce a sound powerful enough to cross an ocean and unsettle a species that prides itself on understanding its own planet. The dark did not hide a beast, it hid a process so large that, heard from thousands of miles away, it sounded like one. That is the quieter horror of these recordings, and it runs through every mystery still to come. The ocean is not malevolent, it is simply enormous and dark and old and almost entirely unwatched, and in that vast unwatched dark, things happen that we hear only as echoes, long after they are done, with no way at first to tell the ice from the animal, the ordinary from the impossible. The bloop was a voice with no body, a sound that turned out to have a source no one could see. But some of the deep sea's mysteries are not sounds at all. Some of them are found, whole and silent, floating on the surface where anyone can board them, and those can be far harder to explain than any noise, because the evidence is right there in front of you, and it still makes no sense. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The bloop was a voice without a body, explained in the end by breaking ice. The next mystery is the reverse, a body without an answer. A ship found drifting in the Strait of Malacca, its entire crew dead where they lay, their faces frozen in terror, and no wound on a single one of them. Section 2. The Ghost Ship, Orang Medan. Somewhere in the waters of Southeast Asia, in the late 1940s, radio operators aboard passing ships and at coastal listening posts caught a distress call that would haunt maritime lore for the better part of a century. It came in two bursts of Morse code, the dots and dashes of a ship in trouble. The first message reported something almost impossible to believe. All the officers, including the captain, were dead, lying in the chart room and on the bridge, and the sender feared the whole crew had died as well. Then, after a stretch of confused and broken signals, a final, chilling phrase arrived across the airwaves. Two words, I die. And then, nothing. Silence where a ship had been. The vessel was called the SS Orang Medan, and the name itself carries a certain melancholy poetry. Orang, sometimes written Orang, is Malay and Indonesian for man or person. Medan is the largest city on the Indonesian island of Sumatra. Put together, the name means roughly the man of Medan, a Dutch freighter said to have been passing through the Strait of Malacca, the busy channel of water between the Malay Peninsula and the island of Sumatra, when it ran afoul of a tragedy that no one has ever been able to explain. That is, if it happened at all. Because the deepest strangeness of the Orang Medan is not what was found aboard her. It is the question of whether she ever existed. Set that question aside for a moment, though, and follow the story as it has been told and retold, because the telling is where the horror lives. According to the most common version, 2 American ships were near enough to respond to the distress call, the City of Baltimore and the Silver Star. It was the Silver Star that reached the stricken freighter first, after what some accounts say was over a day of steaming toward her last known position. When the Americans found the Orang Medan, she was drifting, silent and still. Calls over the megaphone went unanswered. Not a soul stirred on her decks. So the crew of the Silver Star formed a boarding party and rowed across to see what had happened. What they found, in the story, is the image that has fixed the Orang Medan in the imagination of every person who has ever heard of her. The decks were littered with bodies. The crew were dead, sprawled on their backs, their faces turned upward toward the sun, mouths open, eyes staring, teeth bared. Their expressions, the accounts say again and again, were frozen in terror, as if each man had died in the grip of some final, unbearable fear, staring at a horror the rescuers could not see. And there was one detail that lifted the scene from tragedy into nightmare. The ship's dog was dead too, frozen mid-snarl, its lips pulled back as if it had been growling at something in the instant it died. Every living thing aboard had died in the same moment, in the same posture of fright, and there was not a mark on any of them. No wounds, no blood, no sign of violence at all. The rescuers, in the telling, were unnerved by more than the bodies. Some accounts describe an unnatural cold hanging over the ship, despite the tropical heat, a chill that seemed to have nothing to do with the weather. The radio operator was found dead at his station, his hand still resting on the Morse transmitter, having died in the middle of sending the very call that brought the Silver Star to him. Whatever had happened fast. Fast enough to catch a man mid-message, fast enough to freeze a dog mid-growl, and it had left behind a ship full of terrified corpses and no explanation whatsoever. Then, before the mystery could be examined, it erased itself. As the boarding party prepared to tow the Orang Medan back to port so that the bodies could be studied and the cause of death determined, smoke began to rise from within the ship. A fire had broken out in one of the cargo holds, spreading with alarming speed. The Silver Star's crew barely made it off in time, cutting their lines and pulling away, and then the Orang Medan erupted. An explosion tore through her, and the freighter, along with her dead crew and whatever secret had killed them, slipped beneath the surface of the Strait of Malacca and was gone. The evidence sank into the deep, taking the answer with it, which is exactly the kind of ending that makes a mystery permanent. Faced with a scene like that, people have reached for explanations, and some of them are grounded in real chemistry rather than the supernatural. The most enduring theory involves the ship's cargo. If the Orang Medan was carrying dangerous chemicals, and some versions claim she was smuggling substances like potassium cyanide and nitroglycerine, then a leak could explain a great deal. Certain chemical compounds, if they escaped their containers and mixed, or if they broke down in the tropical heat, could release toxic gases capable of killing a crew quickly. Some tellings point specifically to the idea that 2 chemicals combined and produced a poison that spread through the ship. Such a leak could account for the sudden deaths, and a subsequent chemical reaction or fire could account for the explosion that sank her. A related and simpler theory is carbon monoxide poisoning. Carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless gas produced by things like a malfunctioning boiler or a smoldering fire in a poorly ventilated ship. It kills without warning and without leaving visible injury. A crew overcome by carbon monoxide might die where they stood or sat, quietly, without a struggle, which fits the reported absence of wounds. What neither the chemical theory nor the carbon monoxide theory explains cleanly is the part that gives the story its power, the frozen expressions of terror, the faces locked in fright. Poisoning by gas tends to be a quiet death, a slipping away, not a scene of mass horror. That gap between a plausible cause and an implausible tableau is part of what has kept people arguing about the Orang Medan for decades. Other theories abandon chemistry altogether. Some have suggested pirates, given that the waters of Southeast Asia were and are known for piracy, though most accounts insist the bodies were unwounded, which does not fit an attack. Some have reached for natural phenomena, like a sudden release of methane from the seabed, engulfing the ship and suffocating the crew. And some, unsatisfied by any of it, have gone all the way to the supernatural, imagining otherworldly forces, or even, in the most fanciful versions, an encounter with something from beyond the sky. There is no evidence for any of these. There is barely evidence for the ship itself. That is the part that has to be confronted honestly, because it changes everything about how the story should be understood. Despite the vivid detail, despite the distress call and the boarding party and the frozen dog, historians and maritime experts largely regard the SS Orang Medan as a legend rather than a documented event. The problems are serious, and they are many. Lloyd's Register of Shipping, which has kept meticulous records of merchant vessels for centuries, going back to the 1700s, contains no entry for a ship called the Orang Medan. There are no official incident reports of her sinking. There are no insurance claims, no logs, no crew manifests, none of the paper trail that a real ship of any size inevitably leaves behind. The date will not hold still either. Different versions place the events in 1940, in 1947, in 1948, spread across the better part of a decade, and a story that cannot agree on when it happened is a story on unstable ground. The location shifts too, from the Strait of Malacca to the waters near the Solomon Islands to the area around the Marshall Islands, depending on which telling one reads. The Silver Star was a real vessel, but nothing in the records ties the real Silver Star to a rescue attempt matching this story, and some accounts say her logs contain no mention of the Orang Medan at all. The earliest versions of the tale trace back to newspaper reports in the early 1940s, and to a series of articles in a Dutch publication attributed to a writer named Silvio Shirley, with the story picked up and embellished and repeated across later decades, each retelling adding new flourishes, new details, new corpses in new positions. There is even a candidate for where the whole thing came from. The Orang Medan legend bears a strong family resemblance to older ghost ship tales, stories of vessels found adrift with their crews mysteriously dead. There were tales of ships like the Octavius and the Jenny, older legends of frozen crews and captains found dead at their desks with the final log entry still unfinished. Stories that share the exact same bones as the Orang Medan. Abandoned or lifeless vessels, dead crews, mysterious circumstances, a lone detail like a captain's frozen hand or a growling dog, and a gap that can never be closed. It looks very much as though the Orang Medan grew out of that older tradition, a new story assembled from the parts of familiar ones, carried forward on the strength of how deeply it frightens people. None of that has stopped it from spreading, and here the Orang Medan reveals something important about how mysteries survive. The very things that should sink the story, the missing records, the shifting dates, the vanished wreck, get reinterpreted by believers as proof of a cover-up. If there are no records, the argument goes, it is because someone destroyed them. If the cargo was secret chemical weapons in a tense post-war climate, then a government would have every reason to erase the paperwork and let the whole matter drop. The fact that the story was referenced in a United States Coast Guard publication in the early 1950s is offered as evidence that it must be real, that an official body would not repeat pure fiction. And so the absence of evidence becomes, in the retelling, evidence of concealment, which is the kind of reasoning that can never be disproven, because every hole in the story is patched with the assumption that the hole was dug on purpose. What can be said with confidence is narrow, and it is worth stating plainly rather than pretending the terror is settled fact. There is no verified record that the SS Orang Medan ever existed. There is no confirmed wreck, no confirmed crew, no confirmed rescue. The frozen faces, the growling dog, the unnatural cold, the two-word final message, all of it comes from newspaper accounts and second-hand retellings, rather than from documented investigation. The most likely truth is that the Orang Medan is a piece of maritime folklore, a story that captured something real about the fear the sea inspires, and dressed it in the specifics of a particular ship that probably never sailed. And yet the story refuses to die, and the reason it refuses to die is the reason it belongs in any accounting of the deep sea's hold on the human mind. The Orang Medan works because it takes the ocean's oldest fear, the fear of being alone and helpless far from land, and gives it a face. Many faces, in fact, all of them turned toward the sun, all of them frozen in the same terror. It offers the image of a place where death arrives without warning and without mark, where a crew can be alive one moment and staring corpses the next, where the only witness to what happened is a dog that died snarling at something no one else could see. Whether or not a single word of it is true, it captures a real thing, which is how completely the sea can swallow both a ship and its explanation, leaving behind only a story that grows more elaborate the longer it drifts. The deep did not have to be involved for the Orang Medan to frighten people. The story places her on the surface, drifting in a busy strait, boardable and visible. But the ending, the fire and the explosion and the slow slide beneath the waves, sends her and her secret down into the water where no one can follow, and that is where the tale finds its final power. The answer, if there ever was one, is at the bottom of the Strait of Malacca, in the dark, unrecoverable, exactly where the deep sea keeps so many of its answers. A ship that may never have existed carries a mystery that can never be solved, and both the ship and the mystery rest, in the story, on the seafloor together. The Orang Medan may well be a legend, a horror assembled from older horrors and floated on a century of retelling. But the fear it plays on is not invented at all. Real ships do go down. Real crews do die where they sit, fast, with no chance to escape. And the next mystery is not a story at all. It is a documented fact, a real vessel with a real crew that descended on purpose into the deep and was crushed in an instant by the weight of the water above it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Orang Medan is likely a legend, a ghost story with no ship beneath it. The next case is the opposite in every way. A real vessel, a documented crew of 129, and a dive test off Cape Cod that ended when the sea itself pressed the submarine flat in a tenth of a second. Section 3. The loss of the USS Thresher. At 8 o'clock on the morning of the 9th of April 1963, a submarine slipped out of the harbor at Kittery, Maine, and pointed her bow toward the open Atlantic. She was called the USS Thresher, and she was, by every measure the United States Navy could apply, the finest attack submarine in the world. She was nuclear-powered, the lead boat of a new class built around her, and she carried the most advanced sonar and weapons systems the Navy had ever put to sea. She was the fastest, the quietest, and the deepest diving submarine of her day. On board were 129 men. 12 were officers of her crew, 96 were enlisted sailors, and the rest were a mix of a staff officer, shipyard workers, and civilian technical experts who had come along to observe the trials. By the following morning, all of them would be dead, and the Thresher would be scattered across the seafloor 2.5 miles down. The Thresher had come to sea for a specific and demanding purpose. She had spent roughly the previous 9 months in the shipyard, undergoing an extended overhaul, longer than planned, and now she needed to prove herself again. The trial ahead of her was a deep diving test, a controlled descent to what the Navy called her test depth, the deepest point to which her hull had been certified to safely go. For the Thresher, that depth was 1,300 feet. To reach it, she steamed to an area roughly 220 miles east of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, a patch of the Atlantic, chosen in part because the water there was extraordinarily deep, around 8,000 feet from surface to seafloor. That choice of location holds one of the quiet, terrible logics of submarine testing, and it is worth understanding because it shaped everything that followed. A deep diving test carries risk. If something goes wrong at depth, if the boat floods or loses power, the safest possible thing is for her to be over water shallow enough that a rescue might reach her. But the Navy's thinking ran the other way. Rescue technology at the time could not come anywhere near the crush depths of these new submarines. If the Thresher failed at test depth and could not save herself, no rescue ship on Earth could reach her in time, regardless of how deep the water was. So the boat was sent to water so deep that if she could not recover on her own, she was simply doomed. The reasoning was that the crew's survival depended entirely on the submarine's ability to rescue herself, and so the depth of the water beneath her almost did not matter. She would either save herself or she would not. She did not go alone. Accompanying her on the surface was a submarine rescue ship, the USS Skylark, whose job was to stay above the Thresher during the trial and maintain contact. The two vessels could speak to one another through an underwater telephone system, a device sailors nicknamed Gertrude, which sent voice messages through the water itself. The Skylark carried rescue equipment, but there was a bleak fact underlying her presence. Her rescue chamber could reach a maximum depth of around 850 feet. The Thresher was going to more than 1,300. If anything happened at the bottom of the dive, the Skylark could talk to the Thresher, but she could not save her. On the morning of the 10th of April, the Thresher began her deep dive. She descended in stages, pausing to check her systems as she went, easing down through the layers of the Atlantic toward test depth. For a while, everything proceeded normally. Then, past 800 feet and descending, the routine communications from the Thresher took on a different character. A garbled message came up through the underwater telephone to the Skylark, something about a minor difficulty. It was not a scream, not an alarm, just a fragment, spoken calmly, hard to make out. The crew indicated they were experiencing a problem and were attempting to blow their ballast tanks, the standard method for making a submarine rise, forcing high-pressure air into the tanks to push out the water and add buoyancy. But the Thresher did not rise. The men on the Skylark listened as more broken transmissions came through, and then they heard something in one of the final messages about test depth, a reference to how deep the boat was. And then, listening through the water, the sailors on the surface heard a sound that no crew of a rescue ship ever wants to hear. They heard the noise of a submarine breaking apart under pressure, the sound of the sea crushing the Thresher's hull. Somewhere far below them, in the black water, the most advanced submarine in the world was gone, and 129 men with her. To understand what killed the Thresher is to understand what pressure does in the deep, and the numbers are almost impossible to feel. Water is heavy, and the deeper one goes, the more of it presses down from above. For every 33 feet of descent, the pressure increases by roughly the equivalent of the entire atmosphere pressing on the surface. At test depth, the hull of the Thresher was holding back an enormous, constant, crushing force, and a submarine survives that force only because its hull is strong enough to resist it, and because it can, at need, rise back toward the surface where the pressure eases. Take away either of those, the strength of the hull or the ability to ascend, and the sea does the rest. The Navy's Court of Inquiry, which spent nearly 2 months hearing testimony and gathering evidence, arrived at a most probable cause, and it is a chain of failures that fit together with awful precision. The leading theory held that a joint in the boat's piping failed, most likely one of the silver-brazed joints that connected the seawater piping systems. At test depth, seawater under immense pressure would have sprayed into the engine room through the failed joint. That spraying water was dangerous in more ways than one. Beyond the flooding itself, water hitting electrical panels, many of which were not adequately protected against it, could have caused electrical failures, and an electrical failure at that moment could have triggered the worst possible consequence, an automatic shutdown of the nuclear reactor. When a reactor scrams, meaning its control rods drop in and halt the reaction to protect it, the submarine loses propulsion. The restart procedure was rigidly governed and could not be rushed, and it took too long. Too long, that is, to bring the boat's power back before she sank below the depth her hull could survive. The Thresher was flooding. She had lost the propulsion that might have driven her upward toward safety, and she was left with one hope: the emergency system that blows high-pressure air into the ballast tanks to force the boat to rise. That system failed her too, and the way it failed is one of the cruelest details of the whole disaster. When the crew tried to blow the ballast tanks, the high-pressure air rushed through the pipes and, in doing so, dropped sharply in temperature. Moisture in the system froze. Ice formed in the strainers and valves of the air pipes, choking off the flow. The blow started and then stopped. This was not a mistake by the crew. After the loss of the Thresher, the Navy tested an identical system on a sister submarine at dockside, and the exact same thing happened. The air began to flow, then ice formed and blocked it. The very system meant to save a flooding submarine could seize up under the demand placed on it, precisely when it was needed most. So the picture the inquiry assembled was this. A pipe joint failed at depth, seawater flooded in, the electrical systems faltered, the reactor shut down, and the boat lost the power to drive herself upward. The emergency ballast blow, her last hope, froze and failed. And the Thresher, unable to rise and unable to stop her descent, sank past 1,300 feet, past the depth her hull could bear, into water that grew heavier and heavier around her until the pressure won. The end, when it came, was faster than the human mind can register. Analysis based on acoustic data, some of it from classified listening systems, later reconstructed the final moments. One interpretation holds that the boat implosion occurred at a depth of around 2,400 feet, roughly 1,000 feet below her test depth and several hundred feet below the depth at which her hull was predicted to collapse. The implosion itself took about 1/10 of a second. That number matters, and it is the one small mercy in the entire account. 1/10 of a second is faster than the human nervous system can perceive. The men aboard the Thresher, whatever they endured in the minutes of flooding and darkness and failing systems, did not experience the crushing of the hull as an event. It was over before their bodies could register that it had begun. When the wreck was finally located and surveyed, the scene told the story of that instant. The oceanographer Robert Ballard, who years later would become famous for finding the Titanic, examined the Thresher's remains. He described a submarine that looked as though it had gone through a shredding machine, her pieces spread across roughly a mile of seafloor at a depth of some 8,500 feet. The pressure had not simply broken her, it had torn her apart and strewn her across the bottom of the Atlantic, a mile-long field of debris that had once been the most advanced warship of her kind. The loss of the Thresher was a shock to the Navy and to the nation. A blow made heavier by the fact that it happened not in combat, but during a test, in peacetime, to the very submarine that was supposed to represent the future. But out of that loss came something that has saved lives ever since. The Court of Inquiry recommended a far more rigorous program of design review and safety inspection, and in December of 1963, the Navy launched it. It was called SubSafe, a comprehensive system of design standards, construction controls, testing, and certification aimed at ensuring that a submarine's hull stays watertight and that the boat can recover from unexpected flooding. The scale of its impact is stark when measured against history. In the decades before the Thresher, from 1915 to 1963, the Navy lost 16 submarines to accidents that were not combat-related. In all the years since SubSafe began, only one American submarine has been lost to that kind of accident, the USS Scorpion in 1968, and the Scorpion had not been certified under the SubSafe program. There is a lingering human coda to the Thresher that deserves care because it touches on hope and on the difference between what people wish were true and what the evidence supports. In the days after the sinking, a submarine called the Seawolf searched the area, and her log records that her crew heard sounds through their sonar, pings and, at one point, what was described as metal-on-metal banging. The Seawolf even broadcast requests, asking whoever might be down there to bang a set number of times on the hull so that contact could be confirmed. No matching response ever came. Over the years, those reported sounds have fed speculation that the Thresher's crew might have survived longer than anyone believed, alive at the bottom, trying to signal. Honesty requires setting that gently to rest. Every major investigation has concluded that by the time the Seawolf began her search, more than a day after the Thresher was lost, the submarine had already been crushed at depth. Naval analysts have pointed out that sound in the ocean travels enormous distances and bends in strange ways, so that a noise heard on sonar can originate hundreds of miles from where it seems to be, and that the sounds the Seawolf heard were most likely other ships and submarines operating in the area. The men of the Thresher were not banging on the hull in the dark. They were gone in that 1/10 of a second, long before anyone came looking. The comforting story is not the true one, and the true one, for all its grief, at least spares the imagination, the picture of survivors waiting for a rescue that could never have reached them. What the Thresher shows, more clearly than almost any other event, is the plain physical fact that governs everything in the deep. The ocean does not need malice. It does not need a monster or a curse. It needs only depth. Send a vessel far enough down and remove its ability to come back up, and the water will do the rest, patiently, indifferently, with a force no hull can finally withstand. 129 men went down in the finest submarine of their age, and the sea pressed it flat in less time than it takes to blink. That is the deep's simplest and most honest horror, the one that underlies all the others. It is very, very heavy, and it is always pressing down. The Thresher was crushed by the weight of the water above her, all at once, in an instant no one aboard could feel. But there is a way for the deep to kill that is stranger still, and it does not require a submarine or a great depth at all. It requires only pressure, and the removal of it at the wrong moment, and it turns the human body itself into the thing that fails. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Thresher died because the sea pressed in on her hull. The next case is the sea pressing on men directly, and what happened when that pressure was taken away in a single instant. A diving bell, an oil rig in the North Sea, and a mistake that killed 4 men faster than they could know it had happened. Section 4. The Byford Dolphin Accident. At 4 o'clock in the morning on the 5th of November, 1983, in the Frigg gas field of the North Sea, 6 men were carrying out a procedure they had performed many times before. The place was an oil drilling rig called the Byford Dolphin, a semi-submersible platform working the waters between Norway and Scotland. 4 of the men were saturation divers, professionals who worked at the bottom of the sea. The other 2 were dive tenders, the crew on deck who operated the equipment that kept the divers alive. The task at hand was routine, the kind of thing that happens over and over on a rig like this without incident. Within seconds, 4 of those men would be dead, one of them in a manner so violent that it is still cited as one of the most extreme deaths ever recorded, and the whole event would reshape how the diving industry thinks about safety. To understand what happened and why it was so catastrophic requires understanding the strange world of saturation diving. Most divers, whether tourists exploring a reef or commercial divers doing a few hours of work, go down, do their job, and come back up. And the danger they manage is decompression sickness, the condition that arises when a diver returns to the surface too quickly. Under pressure, gases like nitrogen dissolve into the body's tissues, come up too fast, and those gases bubble out, like the fizz when a bottle is opened, and the results can cripple or kill. That is why divers ascend slowly. Saturation divers face a different problem, and it comes from the nature of their work. They service equipment on oil rigs and undersea pipelines at great depths, and they need to spend long stretches down there, days and sometimes weeks. It would be impossibly wasteful and dangerous to have them decompress after every shift. So the industry uses a clever and unnerving solution. The divers live under pressure. They stay in a pressurized environment that matches the depth they work at, so their bodies remain saturated with gas at that pressure the entire time. They eat, sleep, and rest in cramped, high-pressure chambers on the rig, and they travel to their worksite in a diving bell, a sealed capsule that keeps them at working pressure as it is lowered to the seafloor and raised back up. They can stay compressed like this for up to a month at a time. Only at the very end of the job do they undergo a single, long, carefully controlled decompression back to the pressure of the surface. On the Byford Dolphin, this system centered on a set of connected chambers on the rig's deck, linked by a short passage called a trunk to the diving bell. The whole assembly was held at 9 atmospheres of pressure, roughly 9 times the pressure at the surface, matching the depth the divers were working. Everyone inside had bodies saturated with dissolved gas at that pressure. On this early morning, 2 of the divers, Bjørn Bergersen and Truls Hellevik, were returning from a dive, moving from the diving bell back into the living chamber. The other 2 divers, Edwin Coward and Roy Lucas, were already resting inside the chamber. On deck, 2 tenders, William Crammond and Martin Saunders, operated the equipment. The procedure had a strict and vital sequence. The connection between the diving bell and the chamber, the trunk, was sealed by a clamp. Under normal, safe operation, the clamp was never released until the chamber doors were completely closed and the bell was sealed off from the chamber. The doors had to be shut first. The bell could be detached only after. This sequence existed for one reason: to make sure that the pressurized chambers were never suddenly opened to the outside air, while the men inside were still saturated at 9 atmospheres. As long as the order held, the system was safe. Everything depended on the doors being shut before the clamp came loose. On this morning, the order failed. The diving bell was released, the clamp undone, before the chamber doors had been sealed. In one instant, the interior of the chamber system, held at 9 atmospheres, was opened directly to the outside, which sat at 1 atmosphere. The men inside went from 9 atmospheres of pressure to 1, instantly, with no transition whatsoever. This is what is known as explosive decompression, and among people who understand the physics of it, the phrase carries a grim finality. It is not something a human body can survive. Experienced commercial divers describe it plainly as a death sentence. What explosive decompression does to a saturated human body is difficult to write about with dignity, and it should be described plainly rather than dwelt upon, because the point is not the gore, but the physics. The divers' bodies were saturated with dissolved gas at 9 times atmospheric pressure. When that pressure vanished in an instant, the dissolved gas came out of solution all at once, everywhere in the body simultaneously, in a way that is not decompression sickness, but something far more sudden and total. For the divers positioned inside the chambers, death was instantaneous. They did not experience it as an event, any more than the crew of the Thresher experienced the crushing of their hull. It was faster than the nervous system can register. For one of the divers, Truls Hellevik, who was in the process of moving through the opening between the bell trunk and the chamber, the physics acted with a violence that has made this accident notorious in the technical literature. He was partially in the narrow passage when the pressure released, and the sudden, enormous rush of air escaping from high pressure to low, forced through the small opening where his body was, produced forces that killed him and destroyed his body catastrophically and instantly. The autopsy that followed became a landmark, and a difficult one, in the study of what such pressure differentials can do. Again, the mercy, if it can be called that, was speed. There was no interval of suffering. The event was over faster than awareness could form. The fourth death was the tender William Crammond, on deck, and here the accident's violence reached outward beyond the chamber. When the clamp released and the diving bell was no longer held in place, the enormous pressure differential shot the bell away from the chamber with tremendous force, like a cork blasted from a bottle by the pressure behind it. The bell struck Crammond and killed him. The second tender, Martin Saunders, survived, but with serious injuries. Of the 6 men present, 4 were dead in an instant, and a 5th was badly hurt, all in the span of a routine procedure gone wrong by a single step out of order. The cause, when investigators pieced it together, came down to that clamp and the sequence around it. The locking mechanism that sealed the trunking between the bell and the chamber had been released at the wrong moment, with the chamber not yet sealed. Why the sequence broke has been the subject of study and debate. Some analyses have focused on the equipment itself and on the communication between the divers inside and the tenders outside, on how the signal to release was given and received, on whether the design of the system left too much room for a single error to become fatal. What is not in dispute is the outcome of that single error and the fact that the safety of the whole operation rested on a sequence that, once violated, offered no second chance and no possibility of survival. The Byford dolphin accident landed hard on the diving industry, and part of the reason was the scale of it. The North Sea's oil and gas boom had come fast, and in its early years, the diving operations that supported it were pioneering and, by later standards, loosely regulated. Fatal accidents had happened before, but the nature of the work had usually meant only 1 or 2 people were diving at a time, so a single accident tended to claim a single life. Saturation diving changed that. It put multiple men together in a shared pressurized system, and that meant a single catastrophic failure could kill several people at once. Losing 5 men, 4 dead and 1 gravely injured, in one explosive decompression, drove that lesson home in the most brutal way possible. It underlined, as one industry figure later put it, the potential for a single major accident in saturation diving to cause multiple fatalities. The response, over the years that followed, was a transformation in how these operations are run. The accident became one of the worst in the history of modern commercial diving, and it fed a sweeping tightening of safety standards across the North Sea and, eventually, worldwide. Today, diving operations of this kind are required to carry out extensive risk assessment and hazard analysis before they proceed. The systems have been redesigned so that the kind of sequence failure that doomed the Byford Dolphin cannot happen the same way, with mechanisms and interlocks meant to make it physically impossible to release the clamp while the chamber is open. The men who died did not die for nothing, in the sense that the industry they worked in became meaningfully safer because of the investigation into how they were lost. That is cold comfort, but it is real. There is something about the Byford Dolphin that unsettles people in a way distinct from the other deep-sea disasters, and it has to do with the reversal at its heart. The deep sea kills, most of the time, by pressure, by the crushing weight of water pressing inward. That is the death the Thresher suffered, the ocean squeezing a hull until it failed. The Byford Dolphin was the mirror image. These men were not crushed by pressure. They were killed by its sudden absence, by pressure leaving their bodies too fast. Their bodies had adapted to the deep, had become saturated with the deep, had been made, in a sense, into creatures of 9 atmospheres. And then the deep was taken away from them in an instant, and it was that removal, not the depth itself, that killed them. They died of decompression the way the Thresher's crew died of compression, two opposite forces meeting the same fatal end. It also sits uneasily because of how ordinary the moment was. There was no storm, no equipment failure at the bottom of the sea, no monster, no mystery. There was a routine transfer, performed countless times without harm, and a single step taken out of order. The men were not doing anything reckless. They were doing their jobs, at the end of a shift, in the early hours of the morning, following a procedure they knew well. The margin between a safe operation and 4 deaths was 1 clamp, released 1 moment too soon. That thinness, the way catastrophe hid inside routine, is part of what makes the accident haunt the people who study it. The deep sea does not always announce its dangers with drama. Sometimes, the danger lives inside the most familiar action of a working day, waiting for one small mistake, and it reveals something about what it costs to work in the deep at all. The saturation diver's whole existence is an accommodation to an environment that is fundamentally hostile to the human body. To do their work, these men had to let the pressure of the deep into their bodies, to live saturated with it, to become temporarily suited to a place humans are not built to survive. That accommodation is what makes the work possible, and it is also what makes it so dangerous, because the body that has adapted to the deep is a body that must be brought back with extraordinary care. The Byford Dolphin is what happens when that care fails, when the careful, slow, deliberate process of returning a human being from the deep is replaced, in an instant, by violence. The men had gone partway into the world of the deep sea, and the deep sea, when the pressure was wrongly released, did not let them come back. The deaths on the Byford Dolphin were instantaneous, and that speed was the only mercy in them. But not every death in the deep is fast. Some of the deep's most haunting losses come slowly, to people who chose to go down on nothing but a single held breath, chasing depth for its own sake, until the water took them one at a time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. On the Byford Dolphin, the deep killed in an instant, through machinery and pressure and a single misstep. The next case moves to warmer water and a slower, more personal danger. A submersible built of carbon fiber, a dive to the wreck of the Titanic, and 5 people who descended, knowing the risks, and never came back up. Section 5. The Implosion of the Titan. On the 18th of June 2023, a small submersible was lowered into the North Atlantic, roughly 370 miles southeast of St. John's, Newfoundland, and began to sink toward one of the most famous places on the seafloor. Its destination was the wreck of the RMS Titanic, resting under about 12,500 feet of water, more than 2 miles down. The submersible was called the Titan, operated by a company named OceanGate, and it carried 5 people. There was the pilot, Stockton Rush, the co-founder and chief executive of OceanGate. There was a renowned French deep-sea explorer, Paul-Henri Nargeolet, who had visited the Titanic many times and knew the wreck as well as anyone alive. And there were 3 others, who had each paid a substantial sum, reported at $250,000, to make the journey to see the most famous shipwreck in history. At around 10:45 that morning, on the way down, the Titan imploded, and all 5 were killed instantly. The Titan was not an ordinary submersible, and the ways it was unusual are at the center of why it failed. A vessel meant to carry human beings to the crushing depths where the Titanic lies must be built to hold back an almost unimaginable force. At that depth, the pressure on the hull is enormous, described by one expert as the equivalent of the weight of dozens of jumbo jets pressing on the vessel. Traditionally, deep-diving submersibles that carry people are built as spheres of thick titanium or steel, because a sphere distributes that pressure evenly and metal of the right kind can bear it. The Titan broke from that tradition. Its pressure hull, the part that held the occupants, was a cylinder, and it was made largely of carbon fiber, a lightweight composite material, capped at each end with titanium. Carbon fiber is strong and light, and it has revolutionized industries from aviation to sport. But its use for a deep-sea pressure hull carrying humans was unproven and, in the view of many in the field, deeply risky. Metal, when it is stressed toward failure, tends to give warning signs and to behave in predictable ways that engineers understand well. Carbon fiber, under repeated extreme pressure, behaves differently and less predictably. It can accumulate hidden damage over many dives, tiny failures within the material that build up invisibly until the structure gives way. And unlike a metal hull that might deform slowly, a carbon fiber hull that reaches its limit does not bend and leak. It fails all at once. The choice of that material for a human-occupied vessel diving repeatedly to Titanic depths was, in retrospect, the central flaw around which the whole tragedy turned. The story of how the Titan came to be diving at all is, according to later investigation, a story of warnings ignored. In August of 2025, more than 2 years after the disaster, the United States Coast Guard's Marine Board of Investigation released its final report, a document running to hundreds of pages, and its conclusions were blunt. It found that the primary contributing factors were OceanGate's inadequate design, certification, maintenance, and inspection process for the Titan. It described the company's operational and safety practices as critically flawed, and it laid a great deal of responsibility at the feet of the chief executive, Stockton Rush, who was piloting the vessel when it imploded and who died along with the others. The picture the report painted of the company's culture was troubling. It found that Rush had been warned repeatedly about how dangerous the submersible was, and that he had not only ignored the warnings, but pushed back hard against those who raised them. People who spoke up about safety concerns were, according to the report, threatened with lawsuits or with losing their jobs. Rush held nearly all the decision-making power, despite having engineers on his team, and he fired people who objected. The report described a false sense of safety that had been created within the company, a confidence that was not supported by the actual state of the vessel. It found that Rush had inflated figures to bolster the perceived safety and dive count of the final hull, creating a false impression of the submersible's proven reliability. There were also concrete, physical warning signs in the Titan's history that, the investigation found, were not properly addressed. In July of 2022, the Titan had become stuck in the wreckage of the Titanic during a dive and had suffered hull damage that investigators described as irreversible, damage that was not properly investigated afterward. There had been a pattern of repairs and maintenance problems with the hull across 2021, 2022, and the beginning of 2023. And there was the matter of how the vessel was stored. For roughly 7 months between diving seasons, the Titan was kept outdoors, exposed to a wide range of temperatures, from well above freezing to well below, and to freezing rain, sleet, and snow, going through repeated cycles of freezing and thawing. The report noted that this exposure may have damaged the carbon fiber hull, a vessel whose one critical vulnerability was the integrity of its composite hull had been left out in the weather to endure conditions that could degrade exactly that material. Financial pressure ran underneath all of it. By 2023, according to the investigation, OceanGate was under strain, and that strain translated into decisions that compromised safety. Employees were asked to forego their salaries. The company leaned more on contractors than on full-time skilled personnel, and there was a striking gap in oversight. Rush did not fill a vacant engineering director position, which the report noted removed a source of potential pushback on safety decisions. A company built around the extraordinarily demanding task of carrying human beings to the deep ocean had, the report found, allowed cost and time savings to take priority over the caution that such work requires. The chairman of the investigation stated that the loss of 5 lives was preventable. The dive on the 18th of June was the first of the 2023 season, and the start of the expedition had been marked by difficulties. There were setbacks, an inexperienced crew, and rising frustration among some of those involved. One mission specialist, one of the paying passengers, had earlier written that he was not impressed with the seamanship and deckwork standards, that the effort felt amateurish. Another had described seeing crew members handling heavy equipment without proper care and had felt there were the wrong people in the wrong positions. These were the impressions of people about to descend more than 2 miles into the ocean in an experimental vessel, and they capture a sense of unease that the later investigation would confirm was well-founded. The Titan began its descent and, at a certain point on the way down, lost communication with its support ship on the surface, the Polar Prince. Losing contact was not by itself proof of disaster, but when the Titan did not surface as expected in the afternoon, the situation grew serious. OceanGate's own protocol directed the surface team to search the surface for several hours before seeking outside emergency help, and it was not until the evening, past 7 o'clock, that the Canadian Coast Guard was notified of the Titan's distress. From there, the alarm spread quickly into a large multinational search and rescue operation, drawing in the United States Coast Guard and vessels and aircraft from several nations, all racing against the assumption that 5 people might be trapped alive at the bottom of the sea with a finite supply of air. The search gripped the world's attention over the following days, and it was shadowed by a detail that turned out to be a false hope. During the search, sonar detected banging noises in the area, rhythmic sounds that many took as a possible signal from survivors tapping on the hull, waiting to be found. It was a haunting possibility, and it dominated the coverage. But the banging was later determined to be natural ocean sounds, not a signal from the Titan at all. Like the sounds the Seawolf heard after the Thresher was lost, they were the ocean's own noise, mistaken in a moment of desperate hope for the sound of people still alive. There were no survivors banging on anything. By the time the search began, the 5 aboard the Titan had already been dead for days. On the 22nd of June, a remotely operated vehicle searching the seafloor near the Titanic found the answer. It located a debris field, pieces of the Titan scattered on the bottom, roughly 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic. From that debris, officials concluded what had happened. The Titan had suffered a catastrophic implosion, a loss of structural integrity of its pressure hull that had caused the vessel to collapse inward in an instant under the pressure of the deep. The implosion had occurred at around 11:15 on the morning of the 18th, during the descent, days before the world knew and days before the search that had held so many people's attention had even begun. The manner of death, as with the Thresher and the Byford Dolphin, was instantaneous beyond human perception. When a hull fails at that depth, the surrounding water rushes in faster than thought, and the collapse is over in a fraction of a second. Whatever the 5 aboard experienced in the moments before, whatever awareness they may have had of trouble, the implosion itself was not something they could have felt as an event. It was the same 1/10 of a second finality that had ended the Thresher, the same mercy of speed inside the same catastrophe. The investigations did not stop with the Coast Guard. The United States National Transportation Safety Board conducted its own inquiry, and the Transportation Safety Board of Canada released its findings as well. Their conclusions aligned. The Canadian report determined that the as-built properties of the Titan's carbon fiber cylinder had never been validated to confirm they met the values assumed in the design, and that the construction and testing of the Titan had not followed standard engineering practices. As a result, the report stated, OceanGate did not actually know how long the Titan's hull would remain structurally sound when used repeatedly for dives to Titanic depths. The vessel had made a number of successful dives before, which had created an impression of reliability, but that impression rested on nothing solid. Each dive had been, in effect, a gamble on a hull whose true limits no one had ever established. The Coast Guard's investigative team went so far as to say that, had Rush survived, they would have recommended manslaughter charges be considered. OceanGate suspended all operations shortly after the disaster and permanently wound down its business, directing its resources toward cooperating with the investigations. In its statements, the company offered condolences to the families of those who died, but the damage was done and the questions it raised reached beyond one company. The Titan disaster exposed a gap in oversight, a space where a private operator could carry paying members of the public to one of the most dangerous environments on Earth in an experimental vessel that no independent body had certified. The investigation chairman spoke of the need for stronger oversight and for clear paths for operators, exploring new concepts outside the existing rules, so that innovation would not again come at the cost of ignoring the fundamentals of safety. The Titan sits differently among these deep-sea tragedies, because it was, in a sense, chosen. The crew of the Thresher were sailors on duty. The divers on the Byford Dolphin were workers at their trade. But the Titan carried people who had paid to go, drawn by the pull of the Titanic and the desire to see with their own eyes the most storied wreck in the ocean. That desire is not hard to understand. The deep sea holds a fascination that has never let go of the human imagination, and the chance to descend into it, to look upon a place almost no one has ever seen, is a powerful lure. What the Titan showed is how thin the line is between that fascination and catastrophe, and how much rests on the unglamorous work of engineering and certification and honest testing, the careful discipline that stands between a person and the crushing weight of the deep. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The pull of the Titanic drew people into the dark, and a failed hull ended them in an instant. The next case leaves the machine behind entirely. No vessel, no air supply, only a single held breath and a competition in the Bahamas, where the sport of freediving suffered the first death in its history at the bottom of a blue hole. Section 6. The last dive of Nicholas Meverly Dean's Blue Hole on the island of Long Island in the Bahamas is a nearly perfect circle of dark water set into a shallow turquoise bay, and it drops straight down for more than 600 feet, making it one of the deepest blue holes filled with seawater anywhere on Earth. A blue hole is a kind of underwater sinkhole, a shaft in the seabed that plunges far deeper than the water around it. And from above, the contrast is striking. A ring of pale sand and bright shallows surrounding a well of blue, so deep it reads as almost black. For most of the year the place is quiet, but once a year it fills with some of the finest breath-hold divers in the world, gathered for a competition called Vertical Blue, an event sometimes described as the most prestigious in the sport. In November of 2013, one of those divers was a 32-year-old American named Nicholas Meverly, and Dean's Blue Hole is where he made his last dive. Freediving is the sport of descending into the water on a single breath, with no air supply of any kind, no tank, no regulator, nothing but the air held in the lungs from the surface. Divers go down along a weighted guideline, reach a target depth, and return, all on that one breath, sometimes staying under for several minutes and descending well past 100 meters, the height of a 30-story building turned downward into the sea. It is a discipline of extraordinary control, of slowing the heart, of managing the body's rising demand for oxygen, of staying calm in a place and a state that every instinct fights against. At depth, the diver's body changes in profound ways. The heart rate drops, the blood vessels narrow. Under the pressure of the water, the lungs compress until they are a fraction of their surface size, squeezed down toward the size of an orange. The sport lives at the very edge of what the human body can endure, and it asks its athletes to go there again and again, on nothing but the air in their chest. Meverly had come to it late and risen through it fast. He grew up in Florida and had been a gifted swimmer since childhood, able to stay underwater for remarkable stretches even as a young boy on diving trips in the Florida Keys. As an adult, he lived in Brooklyn and worked as a prop technician in film and television, building and handling the physical objects that appear on screen, with credits on shows many people would recognize. He did not take a formal freediving class until 2011, but once he began to compete, his ascent was meteoric. Within a short time, he was winning events, and in May of 2013, he became the first American man to reach a depth of 100 meters on a single breath, a milestone that marked him as one of the best in the country, and by some accounts the best. Those who knew him described a man of intense passion and drive, sensitive and thoughtful, but also possessed of a fierce, almost stubborn determination, a refusal to accept falling short of what he set out to do. That determination was part of what made him extraordinary, and it was also, in the view of some who watched his career, part of what put him at risk. Freediving rewards calm and punishes overreaching. The sport lives on discipline, on knowing when the body has had enough, on the wisdom to turn back. Meverly was known for pushing himself hard, for growing frustrated when a dive did not go the way he wanted, for the tendency to press on when caution might have told him to stop. This is not so much a criticism of the man as a description of the temperament that so often accompanies greatness in a demanding pursuit. But it is a temperament the sport can turn against a person, because in freediving the consequence of pushing too far is not simply a failed attempt. It can be a blackout in the water, an injury deep in the lungs, or worse. The Vertical Blue competition in 2013 brought together 56 divers from 21 countries over 10 days, and Meverly arrived, aiming for records. His attempts across the event had not all gone smoothly. On one dive earlier in the week, in a discipline where divers pull themselves down and back along a rope, he had run into trouble at depth and had to be helped to the surface, and when he came up, blood was seen at his mouth. That blood came from what freedivers call a squeeze, an injury in which the pressure at depth causes small blood vessels to burst, in the airways or the lungs, when the compressed tissues cannot withstand the force being placed on them. A squeeze is a warning. It is the body signaling that it has been pushed to the point of damage. Meverly had experienced this kind of injury before, and it is part of the shadow that hangs over his final week, the sense of an athlete repeatedly asking his body for more than it could safely give. On the 17th of November, Meverly attempted a dive in the most difficult category the sport offers, a descent with no fins and no rope to pull on, powered only by the diver's own swimming, on a single breath. His target was 72 meters, about 236 feet, a depth that would have set an American record. He entered the water and began his descent, sinking down along the line into the dark. On the way down, at around 68 meters, he appeared to hesitate, to begin turning back toward the surface, the sensible choice when something does not feel right. And then, in the moment that would define the tragedy, he seemed to change his mind. He turned back downward and continued, pushing on to reach the depth he had set for himself. He reached it, and he began the long climb back up. After 3 minutes and 38 seconds underwater, Nicholas Meverly broke the surface under his own power. To the people watching, it looked, for an instant, like a success. He flashed the OK sign, the gesture divers use to signal they are all right, and he attempted to complete the surface protocol, the short set of actions and words that make an attempt official, saying that he was okay. But the words came out garbled. His eyes were wide and blank. Something was badly wrong. About 30 seconds after surfacing, still at the surface, he lost consciousness and fell backward into the water. The safety divers and the event physician went to work at once. This is the part of the sport that its defenders rightly point to, the layer of protection built around every competitive dive. Athletes are followed by safety divers who can bring them up, and a medical team waits at the surface. The system exists precisely because blackouts are a known danger. In Meverly's case, the team responded immediately, but as they worked, it became clear this was not an ordinary blackout from which a diver is quickly revived. There was a problem with his lungs. Blood came from his mouth. His pulse faded and then disappeared. The medical team performed resuscitation for an extraordinary length of time, working on him for around 90 minutes, before he was transported to a local health center. He was pronounced dead early that afternoon. He had suffered a pulmonary injury, fluid and blood filling his lungs, the result of the extreme pressure his body had endured at depth. A large volume of fluid was later removed from his lungs. The governing body of the sport determined he had died from a lung injury caused by the pressure difference his body could not withstand. Nicholas Mevoli was the first athlete to die in an international freediving competition. That fact carried a particular weight because competitive freediving had, until then, maintained what its organizers described as an enviable safety record. The sport oversaw a great many dives each year, tens of thousands of competitive descents over the years, and deaths in sanctioned competition had been essentially unheard of. In their statement after his death, the Vertical Blue organizers acknowledged the shock and grief, and they said something that any honest account of the sport must include: that competitive freediving had a strong safety record, but that the sport could never be entirely free of risk, a truth understood by all freedivers. The competition was cancelled in the wake of his death, and the community that had gathered at the Blue Hole was left to grieve one of its own. His death became a turning point, a moment when the sport was forced to look hard at itself. One of the uncomfortable realizations that followed was how little was actually understood about what freediving does to the human body over time. The sport had grown quickly, with a governing body overseeing many competitions and thousands of dives, and yet the long-term effects of descending so deep, of compressing the lungs so severely, again and again, were not well mapped. The cumulative toll on the body, the way repeated squeezes and repeated extreme dives might build toward catastrophe, was not fully known. Mevoli's death pushed those who cared about the sport to acknowledge that gap and to think harder about the safety protocols meant to protect athletes who were, in effect, exploring the limits of human physiology in real time, without a complete map of where those limits lay. There is a detail in his death that lingers, and it is the moment on the way down when he turned back and then turned again. In that instant is the whole tension of the sport, and perhaps of the man. He had begun to do the safe thing, to abort, to rise. And then something, the drive that had carried him so far so fast, the refusal to fall short, the pull of the depth he had set for himself, sent him back down. It is impossible to know what passed through his mind in that moment, at 68 meters, in the dark, on a held breath, his body already straining. But the choice he made there is the choice the sport constantly places before its athletes. The choice between the number and the body, between the record and the return. Most times, most divers, most days, that choice ends fine. For Mevoli, on that dive, it did not. His story also complicates the easy picture people carry of extreme sports and the people who pursue them. It would be simple to file him away as reckless, a man who took a foolish risk and paid for it. But the people who knew him did not describe recklessness. They described passion, altruism, kindness. A man much loved, someone who volunteered and cared deeply about others, alongside the fierce competitive drive. He was not careless with his life. He was pursuing something that meant a great deal to him, in a sport he loved, surrounded by a community he belonged to, with safety systems in place around him. And still it killed him, because the thing he loved sat so close to the edge that even with every precaution, the margin was thin enough to vanish in a single dive. What Dean's Blue Hole represents, in the end, is a particular kind of relationship between humans and the deep, different from the sailors and the workers and the paying passengers of the earlier cases. Mevoli was not carried into the deep inside a machine. He went into it with his body, on his own breath, seeking not to reach a wreck or service a pipeline, but to test how far the human animal alone could go. That impulse, to meet the deep on its own terms, with nothing between the body and the water, is ancient and powerful. It is the same impulse that has drawn people to dive for pearls and sponges for thousands of years, refined now into a sport of records and competitions. But the deep does not soften its terms for an athlete. The pressure that crushed a submarine's hull and killed the men on the oil rig is the same pressure that filled Nicholas Mevoli's lungs. He simply met it without armor, and the water asked of his body exactly what it asks of everything that goes down into it. The Blue Hole is still there, still drawing divers, still holding its records and its risks. Mevoli's death changed how the sport thinks about safety, and there is some comfort in that, the sense that his loss made others more careful. But it did not change the fundamental bargain. To dive deep on one breath is to place the body in a place it was not built to survive, and to trust in training and caution and a little luck to bring it back. Most of the time, the bargain holds. On the 17th of November 2013, for one of the best in the world, it did not, and the sport learned, at the cost of a life, that its enviable record had never been the same as safety. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Nicholas Mivoli died in front of a crowd, with safety divers and a physician steps away, and still could not be saved. The next diver was greater than he was, the most decorated in the history of the sport, and she vanished on an easy dive in calm water off the coast of Spain, her body never found. Section 7. The vanishing of Natalia Molchanova. On the 2nd of August 2015, in calm water off the Spanish island of Formentera, near Ibiza, a 53-year-old woman slipped from a boat into the Mediterranean and went down for a dive that should have been effortless for her. The sea that day was gentle, little wind, little swell, an ordinary summer morning. She was with friends. She descended, as she had descended thousands of times before, and then the ordinary morning became something else, because she did not come back up. After a few minutes, concern. After a few more, a call to the Coast Guard. Then rescue divers, then robotic submersibles searching the depths. But there was nothing. The woman who had gone into the water was Natalia Molchanova, and she was, by wide agreement, the greatest freediver who had ever lived. She was never seen again. To understand the shock of her disappearance, it helps to understand what she was. Molchanova did not merely hold records, she defined the sport. Over her career, she set 41 world records, crossed the pool disciplines and the open water disciplines both, and she earned 22 world championship medals, 19 of them gold. She could hold her breath, motionless, for over 9 minutes. She could dive past 100 meters on a single breath. She could swim the length of a pool and back many times over without surfacing. Her dominance was so complete that at one world championship, her winning time in a breath-holding event was longer than the time that won the men's gold in the same discipline. Her peers and rivals did not describe her as one of the best. They described her, again and again, as the greatest the world had ever seen, and quite possibly the greatest it ever would. Her path to that greatness was as remarkable as the records themselves. She was born in 1962 in the Soviet Union, in the city of Ufa, and she trained as a competitive swimmer in her youth. Then, at around the age of 20, she stopped. She married and had 2 children, a son and a daughter, and for roughly 2 decades, she lived an ordinary life as a mother, her days filled with family rather than competition. She was already 40 years old when she read a magazine article about freediving, and something in it caught hold of her. At an age when most athletes have long since retired, she began again, transitioning from swimming to the breath-hold sport, and within less than a decade, she had become the most respected freediver in the world. It is one of the most extraordinary second acts in the history of any sport. A woman who found her calling at 40 and rewrote the record books before she was done. For Molchanova, freediving was never only a sport. She spoke about it in language that was almost spiritual, and she meant it. She described a mental state she called attention deconcentration, a way of turning completely inward on a dive, of abandoning thought and becoming aware of the whole of the body at once, of losing the outside world and the chatter of the thinking mind, and simply feeling. Freediving, she said, was not only a sport, but a way to understand who we are. When we go down, she explained, if we do not think, we understand that we are whole, that we are one with the world. On the surface, she said, it is natural to think, and we carry so much information inside us, and sometimes we need to reset, and freediving helped her do that. She held a doctorate in pedagogical science, she wrote handbooks on the sport, she founded and led the Russian Freediving Federation, and she trained thousands of people. She was not a daredevil, she was a scholar and a teacher of the deep as much as a competitor in it. That is what makes the manner of her disappearance so hard to absorb. She did not vanish while chasing a record. She was not at the outer limit of her ability, pushing into unknown depth. When Molchanova disappeared, she was on a private lesson dive, teaching, in circumstances that for her were almost trivial. Accounts of the depth vary somewhat, placing it at around 30 to 40 meters, with some reports citing 35, but whatever the exact figure, it was modest for her. She had been 3 times as deep as that on countless occasions. This was, for a woman of her ability, the equivalent of a walk she had taken 10,000 times. It was calm water, a clear day, a shallow dive by her standards, and she was diving without fins, moving under her own power. There was no reason, on paper, for anything to go wrong. What is thought to have happened comes down to the sea itself, and to a danger that lurks even in gentle conditions. According to her son, Alexei Molchanov, a champion freediver in his own right, there was a strong current at depth that day, unseen from the calm surface. The waters where she dove can be treacherous below, subject to powerful underwater currents that do not show themselves in the swell above. Molchanova was diving without weights, and the leading understanding is that she was caught by a current and carried down, pulled deeper than she intended, into a situation from which, even for her, there was no return. She never came up for air. The current that took her, if that is indeed what happened, was invisible from the boat, a hidden force moving beneath a surface that looked entirely safe. The search began quickly, and it was extensive. Rescue efforts continued through daylight hours over the following days. Divers went down. Robotic submersibles combed the depths. Her son took part, but the sea gave nothing back. There was no body, no equipment, no trace. Within a few days, those searching accepted the truth that the Mediterranean had taken her and would not return her. Her son put it with a quiet devastation that has stayed with the sport ever since. "It seems," he said, "she will stay in the sea." Under Spanish law, a person missing amid a dangerous activity could be formally declared deceased after a period of months. But the family and her peers understood long before that what had happened. The world's greatest freediver was gone, and the deep had kept her. The tributes that followed captured the scale of the loss. Fellow champions spoke of losing not just a colleague, but the queen of the sport, a figure who would never be replaced. One rival, herself among the finest freedivers in the world, said only that Molchanova was the greatest the world had ever seen, and quite possibly the greatest it would ever see. The International Freediving Federation said her passion for the sport had burned so deep that she had dedicated her life to it, and that whatever had caused her disappearance, she had been doing what she loved. That last phrase, doing what she loved, is one that gets said often about people who die in extreme pursuits, and it can sound hollow. In Molchanova's case, it carried real weight, because for her, the sport truly was a way of being in the world, a practice as much as a competition, and she was lost, not in a moment of recklessness, but in the ordinary exercise of the thing that gave her life meaning. There is a haunting completeness to the way she disappeared that sets her apart, even from the other losses in this account. The Thresher was found, a mile of debris on the seafloor. The Titan was found, scattered near the wreck it had come to see. Even the sailors of those disasters, though gone, left wreckage that told the story. Molchanova left nothing. She went into calm blue water on a clear morning and simply did not return, and the sea closed over her without a mark. There was no wreck to survey, no cause to confirm beyond the likely current, no final image, no recording. The greatest practitioner the sport has ever known vanished into the medium she had mastered more completely than anyone alive, and the deep did not even leave a body to grieve over. It is the most literal kind of disappearance, a person subtracted from the world with no evidence left behind but her absence. That absence carries a particular irony that is impossible to miss. Molchanova understood the deep better than almost any human being who has ever lived. She had trained her body and her mind to go where others could not, to stay calm in the crushing dark, to read the signals of her own physiology with a precision that let her push to depths and durations that seemed impossible. She had written the books that taught others how to survive down there, and it was the deep, her deep, the place she knew best, that took her, on a dive that should have been nothing, in conditions that looked entirely safe. Mastery did not protect her. If anything, her story is a reminder that the deep offers no permanent safety to anyone, that all the skill and knowledge in the world buys only a reduction of risk, never its elimination, and that the sea can take even the person who understands it most deeply, on a day when everything seems fine. Her disappearance also cast a long shadow over the sport she had elevated, coming as it did not long after Nicholas Mevoli's death at the Blue Hole. Within a short span, freediving had lost a rising star in front of a crowd and its greatest legend in silent water off Spain. And the two events together forced a reckoning with just how dangerous the pursuit remained, even at its highest levels. If the best in the world could be lost on an easy dive, then no one was truly safe, and the comforting idea that skill and experience could keep the danger at bay had to be set aside. Her son, Alexei, has continued in the sport, carrying on the family's place at its pinnacle, holding records of his own, a living link to the mother who taught him and who stayed in the sea. What Molchanova's story leaves behind is not a mystery in the sense of an unsolved puzzle. The likely cause, a current at depth, is understood well enough. The mystery is of a quieter and more permanent kind. The mystery of a person who is simply gone, who entered the water in full view and was never found, whose last minutes happened in a place no one could see and were witnessed by no one, recorded by nothing. She descended into the blue, and the blue kept her, and everything after is silence. For a woman who spoke of freediving as a way to become one with the world, to lose the boundary between the self and the water, there is a terrible poetry in the ending, that she went down into the sea she loved and became, finally and completely, a part of it. The deep took Molchanova quietly and kept her, leaving no body and no image, only her absence. But there is a place where the deep has taken diver after diver, dozens upon dozens, and it did not always let them vanish unseen. Sometimes it let a camera keep running, so that the last minutes of a life were captured in full, at a site that divers came to call, with grim accuracy, the cemetery. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Natalia Molchanova disappeared without a trace, her final moments seen by no one. The next place is the opposite kind of horror, a sinkhole in the Red Sea that has killed more divers than anywhere on Earth, where one man's camera kept recording all the way down and captured a death that has been watched by millions. Section 8. The Divers' Cemetery. At Dahab, a few kilometers north of the town of Dahab, on the Sinai coast of Egypt, where the desert mountains come down almost to the water, there is a sinkhole in the reef called the Blue Hole. From the shore, it does not look like much. There is a shallow lagoon, a coral wall, clear warm water, and a faded, hand-painted sign near the entry point, decorated with cheerful pictures of fish and a bubble-blowing diver. The sign reads, in friendly letters, "Easy entry." A few steps from that sign, the seabed falls away into a shaft that plunges down more than 100 meters, over 400 feet, into darkness. The Blue Hole of Dahab is widely considered the deadliest dive site on the planet, and the path leading down to it is lined with something that tells the truth the cheerful sign does not. Screwed into the cliff face above the water are dozens of small stone plaques, hand-painted, in Russian and German and English and Arabic. Each one bears a name, a date, and an age. Most of the ages fall between 25 and 40. Divers call this the cemetery. No one knows exactly how many people have died at the Blue Hole. There is no official count. The Egyptian government does not publish figures, and the dive operators who work the site have little reason to advertise its toll. Estimates from those who know the place range widely, with figures commonly cited between roughly 130 and 200 deaths over recent decades, and some who work there believing the true number is higher still. The plaques on the cliff represent only a fraction of the lost. What is not in dispute is that this single site, this one hole in a reef beside a quiet Egyptian town, has claimed more divers than any other place in the world, and that it has done so not because it is uniquely deep or uniquely violent, but because of a particular feature and a particular kind of human decision that keeps repeating. The feature is called the arch. Partway down the wall of the Blue Hole, at a depth of around 55 meters, roughly 180 feet, there is an opening, the mouth of a natural tunnel that runs through the reef and connects the sinkhole to the open sea beyond. The tunnel is about 26 meters long, and its ceiling sits at that 55-meter depth, while its floor drops away much deeper as it reaches the seaward side. opening into water that falls off toward 1,000 meters. Divers describe the arch as cathedral-like, a vast and beautiful passage, and in the extraordinary clarity of the Red Sea it looks close, achievable, an inviting doorway, rather than the trap it so often becomes. That visual deception is part of the danger. The opening appears nearer and easier than it is, and it lures divers toward a depth and a commitment far beyond what they are trained or equipped to handle. The depth is where the killing happens, and the mechanism is a phenomenon called nitrogen narcosis. When a diver breathing ordinary compressed air descends past a certain depth, the nitrogen in that air begins to have an intoxicating effect on the brain, something like drunkenness. Judgment blurs, confidence swells even as competence collapses, motor skills fail. The condition is sometimes called the rapture of the deep, and it is insidious precisely because the diver often does not realize it is happening. At the depths around the arch, well beyond the limit considered safe for recreational diving on air, narcosis can render a diver confused and disoriented within moments. Some who have died at the blue hole are believed to have done things that make no sense to a clear mind, removing their regulators or trying to empty their buoyancy vests when they should have filled them, sinking faster and faster while their impaired brains failed to grasp what was going wrong. Add to narcosis the increased consumption of air at depth, the down currents that can grab at a diver's fins, and the poor visibility inside the tunnel, and the arch becomes a place where a single mistake compounds into death with terrible speed. Of all the deaths at the blue hole, one stands apart because it was recorded in full. On the 28th of April 2000, a 22-year-old Russian-Israeli diving instructor named Yuri Lipsky entered the water at the blue hole carrying an air tank, a belt weighted for descent, and a video camera mounted to his helmet. Local divers had warned him. Accounts describe an experienced instructor who had gone around asking for someone to accompany him, who had been advised against what he intended, and who went in anyway, alone, on a single tank of ordinary air. His own father, before the trip, had made him promise not to do anything foolish. He descended into the blue hole, and his camera recorded everything. The footage, which was recovered afterward, and which has since been watched by millions of people online, is difficult to describe with the dignity the man deserves, and the details matter only because they show, more clearly than any warning ever could, how the deep kills a diver at this site. The video begins as an ordinary dive along the inner wall. Lipsky drifts deeper and deeper. He appears to enter an uncontrolled descent, sinking faster than he should, past the safe limits, down toward the bottom. As he goes, something changes in his behavior, the confusion of narcosis and the panic of a diver who realizes, too late, that he is in serious trouble. He reaches the floor of the hole at around 115 meters, roughly 377 feet, a depth far beyond what his single tank of air could support. There he struggles. He is unable to rise. In his impaired and panicking state, he loses the fight, and the camera keeps recording as he dies at the bottom, alone, in the dark. His body was recovered the following day by a local technical diver named Tarek Omar, a man who has spent years pulling the dead from the blue hole, and who has recovered so many bodies that he has lost count. When Omar retrieved Lipsky's equipment, he found the helmet camera, and to his surprise it was still working. He had found it at a depth far beyond what such a camera was designed to survive, and yet it functioned. When the footage was played back, Lipsky's mother was present. Omar later spoke of his deep regret over this, saying that had he known the camera held a recording, he would have flooded it and destroyed it before it could be seen, so that Lipsky's mother would not have to carry the footage of her own son's death. But the recording survived, and it made its way online, and it became one of the most well-known diving deaths in the world, a piece of footage passed around and, unbearably, used by dive instructors as a teaching tool, the clearest possible illustration of how a capable person can talk himself into dying in the deep. Lipsky is far from the only name on the cliff. Among the plaques are memorials to divers from many countries, people who came to test themselves against the arch and did not return. There are stones for pairs of friends who died together on the same day. There is a story, told by Tarek Omar, of two young Irish divers he recovered years ago, found locked in an embrace on the seabed, one having apparently gotten into difficulty and dragged the other down when he tried to help. That image, of a rescue attempt that became a shared death, captures something about how the blue hole kills, not only through solitary error, but through the human instinct to save a friend, which at these depths can turn one death into two. More recent years have brought a death of a different and even more painful character. The blue hole has also claimed people not through their own overreaching, but through heroism. An Irish diver named Stephen Keenan, 36 years old and highly respected in the freediving community, died at the site in 2017 while serving as a safety diver for a world-class freediver during a challenging dive through the arch. When the dive went wrong and the freediver he was protecting drifted into danger, Keenan went to her aid, and in doing so he lost his own life while saving hers. His death is remembered as an act of sacrifice, a man who died so that another would live, and it stands as a reminder that even the most skilled and prepared are not safe at the blue hole, and that sometimes the ones who die are the ones who went in specifically to keep someone else alive. For a long time, the blue hole's reputation was managed mostly through wishful thinking and lax oversight. Despite rules meant to restrict deep diving on compressed air in the Red Sea, divers reported guides willing to look the other way for a fee, and inexperienced people were sometimes led toward depths far beyond their training. The site's very deadliness became part of its draw, its nickname as the Diver's Cemetery, attracting exactly the kind of person who wanted to test their limits against a place with a body count. But over time, and particularly since around 2015, the local industry has tightened. Reputable dive centers now refuse to take anyone through the arch without verified technical certification, properly planned gas mixtures that reduce narcosis, and a similarly qualified partner. Egyptian authorities have posted a permanent presence at the site to ensure divers enter only with certified guides, and personnel monitor compliance. The rate of death has fallen, though occasional new plaques still appear on the cliff, and occasional new bodies are still recovered, usually days later. What makes the blue hole different from the other deep-sea horrors is that it is, in almost every case, avoidable, and that is precisely what makes it so haunting. The Thresher was killed by a failed pipe joint, the Titan by a flawed hull, Mulcanova by an invisible current. These were, in various ways, things that happen to people. The blue hole, more often, is a place where people do something to themselves. The vast majority of the site is a safe and beautiful dive. A recreational diver can explore the inner wall at modest depths, surrounded by excellent coral and abundant fish, in superb visibility, and never come near danger. The deaths cluster almost entirely around the choice to go for the arch, to push past the safe limit toward that deceptively close opening, on inadequate gas, beyond one's training, chasing the feeling of having done the thing that kills people. The blue hole does not reach out and take divers. It waits, and it lets them come to it, and it punishes the decision to overreach with a consistency that no other site can match. The plaques on the cliff are the honest voice of the place, set against the cheerful painted sign at the water's edge. The sign promises easy entry, and it is telling the truth, because the entry is easy. It is the exit from the depths of the arch that so many have found impossible. Each stone on that wall is a person who looked at the beautiful blue water and the inviting tunnel and made a choice, and the wall grows, slowly, one name at a time, a memorial written by the dead for the living, warning them in a way the friendly sign never will. The blue hole is proof that the deep does not always need machinery, or mystery, or bad luck to kill. Sometimes, it needs only a beautiful, deceptive doorway, and a human being willing to believe they can pass through it and come back. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The blue hole kills people who choose to go too deep, and its danger is entirely human. The next mystery is older than any of these, older than the sport of diving, older than the ships. For centuries, sailors swore that something vast and many-armed lived in the deep and pulled ships under, and everyone knew it was a legend, until the day a camera finally proved it was real. Section 9. The Kraken made real. Long before there were hydrophones or submarines, or divers with cameras, there were the stories. Sailors returning from long voyages spoke of a creature that lived in the deep, a thing of enormous size and many writhing arms, capable of rising from the black water to seize a ship and drag it under. In Scandinavia, they called it the kraken. The Greeks had their many-armed Scylla. In the Caribbean, there were tales of the Lusca. Even the ancient philosopher Aristotle, writing his history of animals more than 2,000 years ago, described a huge sea creature he called the Teuthus, said to grow to an enormous length. These stories were dismissed for centuries as the exaggerations of frightened men, the way the mind turns the dark unknown of the sea into monsters. And then, slowly, across the modern era, science began to confirm that the sailors had been describing something real all along. The creature behind the legends is the giant squid, and its larger, heavier cousin, the colossal squid. For a very long time, these animals existed for science only in fragments and in death. The giant squid, known by the scientific name Architeuthis, can grow to enormous lengths, with some estimates reaching well over 40 feet, including its long feeding tentacles. The colossal squid, Mesonychiteuthis, is shorter but far more massive, stockier, and heavier, estimated to reach around 7 meters, over 20 feet, and to weigh as much as half a ton, which would make it the heaviest invertebrate on the planet, the largest animal without a backbone. These are not modest creatures. They are genuinely the stuff the legends described, vast animals with grasping arms living in the deep. And for most of human history, the only proof of them was indirect. That indirect proof came mostly from the bellies of whales and from the occasional carcass. The colossal squid was first identified and named a century ago, in the 1920s, from remains found in the stomach of a sperm whale. For 100 years afterward, scientists studied the species largely through the pieces left behind, through the remains found in the guts of the whales and seabirds that ate them, and through the marks these squid left on the bodies of the whales that hunted them, great circular scars from the hooks and suckers on the squid's arms. Only a handful of adult colossal squid specimens have ever been reported at all, a number small enough to count on your fingers, and those were dying or dead. The living animal, at home in the deep, had never been seen. Scientists knew the giant and colossal squid existed the way one knows a stranger from their shadow, from traces and aftermaths, never from a direct look at the thing itself, alive in its own world. Part of the reason is where these animals live. The deep sea, below the reach of sunlight, is the largest habitat on Earth and the least visited. It is dark, cold, and under crushing pressure, and it is enormous. So enormous that a creature the size of a giant squid can move through it for a human lifetime without ever crossing paths with a person. To see one alive, scientists would have to go down into that darkness and happen to be pointing a camera in the right direction at the right moment, an almost impossible convergence. For decades, the technology and the luck never quite came together. The squid remained a shadow, confirmed to exist, but never observed living. A real animal that still somehow belonged more to legend than to documented science. The breakthrough for the giant squid came in 2012, in the Pacific Ocean near the Ogasawara Islands, roughly 1,000 kilometers south of Japan, in an area where earlier signs of the animal had been noted. A team from Japan's National Science Museum, working with a Japanese broadcaster and a documentary channel, set out specifically to find and film a living giant squid in its natural habitat, something no one had ever done. It was painstaking work. Using a manned submersible and a specially designed camera built to capture images in the deep and dark, the team made scores of descents, dozens of trips below the surface, patiently searching the black water for a creature that might be anywhere or nowhere. And then, at a depth of around 630 meters, in the cold dark far below the light, they found one. The camera captured a giant squid, alive, holding onto bait, and swimming against the current in the depths, the first footage of its kind in history. The scientist who led that effort described the moment with a kind of wonder that cuts against every image of the fearsome kraken. The giant squid, he said, was so beautiful that it seemed to sparkle. He spoke of being thrilled to see it firsthand. The monster of the legends, filmed at last in its own world, struck the people who saw it not as a horror, but as something extraordinary and lovely. A shimmering creature, moving through the dark. The animal that sailors had feared for centuries. that stories had turned into a ship destroyer, was revealed on film as a real and living thing, strange and graceful, going about its life in a place humans had almost never seen. The colossal squid took longer, and its first living appearance came only recently, in a moment that carried a poignant coincidence. In early 2025, 100 years after the species had first been named, a team of scientists finally filmed a colossal squid alive in its natural environment for the first time. The footage was captured by a remotely operated vehicle called Sebastian, operated from a research vessel during an expedition to the remote South Sandwich Islands in the South Atlantic, part of an international effort to discover new marine life. The vehicle recorded the creature at a depth of around 600 meters, roughly 2,000 feet down. On the 100th anniversary of its discovery, the animal that science had known only from carcasses and whale stomachs was seen, at last, alive. And there was a surprise in it. The colossal squid they filmed was not a leviathan. It was a baby, a juvenile, measuring only about 30 centimeters, roughly a foot long, a fraction of the enormous size it would grow to as an adult. In the footage, it appears as a delicate, mostly transparent, speckled little creature, its dome topped with small fins that flapped like tiny wings, its tentacles drawn up beneath it. It was, the scientists said, beautiful and unusual, a faint, fluttering shape emerging from the deep blue dark. One expert who helped verify the footage said it was humbling to think that these creatures have no idea humans exist, that this tiny animal was going about its life in the depths, entirely unaware of the species that had spent a century hunting for a glimpse of it. For 100 years, she noted, science had mainly encountered these animals as prey remains and as predators of the fish that people harvest. Now, finally, here was one alive, a baby, seen in its own home. There is something worth sitting with in the shape of this story, because it runs opposite to almost every other mystery of the deep. The bloop turned out to be less than the legend, a block of ice rather than a monster. The ghost ship dissolved under scrutiny into folklore. So many of the deep's mysteries shrink when the truth arrives, the frightening possibility replaced by a mundane explanation. But the giant and colossal squid went the other way. Here the legend turned out to be, in its essential claim, true. There really is a vast, many-armed creature living in the deep. The sailors were not simply inventing horrors out of the dark. They were describing, in the exaggerated language of fear, an animal that genuinely exists. And when the cameras finally reached it, they did not debunk the kraken. They confirmed that something very much like it was down there all along. At the same time, the confirmation transformed the legend, even as it verified it. The kraken of the stories was a malevolent force, a destroyer of ships, a monster driven to drag sailors to their deaths. The animal the cameras found is nothing of the kind. It is a wild creature, adapted with astonishing precision to a place humans can barely reach, going about the business of survival in the cold dark. The colossal squid has the largest eyes of any animal ever studied. Eyes measured at around 10 inches across, roughly the size of a soccer ball, and possibly the largest eyes of any creature that has ever lived. An adaptation for gathering the faintest traces of light in a world of near-total blackness. It has hooks on its arms, built-in headlights of its own, in the form of light-producing organs near its eyes. Every feature is a solution to the problem of living where it lives. It is not a monster, it is a marvel, a masterpiece of adaptation to an environment so hostile that its very existence there is a kind of wonder. The century-long gap between naming the colossal squid and seeing it alive is itself a lesson about the deep sea, and it is a humbling one. This is not some obscure microbe. It is one of the largest animals on the planet, a creature of legend, actively sought by scientists, and it took 100 years of technological progress and patient searching to capture a single clear look at a living one. And even then, the one they found was a baby. If it takes that long and that much effort to film an animal that large and that famous, it says something staggering about how little of the deep sea we have actually seen. The ocean's depths remain the least explored part of our own world, more thoroughly mapped, in some respects, by our instruments pointed at the moon and Mars, than by our eyes turned downward into our own sea. The squid is proof of how much is still down there, unseen, going about its life entirely indifferent to us. That indifference is perhaps the most quietly striking thing about the whole revelation. For thousands of years, humans have populated the deep with creatures obsessed with us. Monsters that hunt our ships and crave our destruction. The sea imagined as a place of malevolence aimed at humankind. The living squid, when it finally appeared on camera, was doing nothing of the kind. The baby colossal squid had, as the scientists said, no idea that humans exist. It was simply there, in the dark, being what it is. The deep sea is not full of monsters lying in wait for us. It is full of life that has never needed us and never noticed us, adapted to a world that has nothing to do with ours. And the horror the legends attached to it was always a projection, our own fear of the dark unknown, dressed up in tentacles and malice. The truth is stranger and, in its way, more unsettling. The deep does not hate us. It does not know we are here. It simply holds, in its vast dark, creatures we are only now, after all these centuries, beginning to glimpse. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Kraken was real, and the camera proved it, turning a legend into a marvel. The last mystery turns that trust against itself. A sonar image from the floor of the Baltic Sea, a shape with strange straight edges and stair-like formations, and millions of people convinced they were looking at a sunken craft that could not possibly exist. Section 10. The Baltic Sea Anomaly. In June of 2011, a Swedish treasure hunting crew was working the floor of the northern Baltic Sea, in the center of a body of water called the Gulf of Bothnia, between Sweden and Finland. They called themselves the Ocean X Team, and their business was searching for sunken shipwrecks and lost cargo, the kind of work that involves dragging sonar equipment behind a boat and watching the returning images for anything that stands out on the seabed. They had been out for 9 days. They were tired and heading home, and on one final pass with their sonar, according to the team's account, something turned up in the data that stopped them cold. Resting on the seafloor, at a depth of around 90 meters, roughly 300 feet down, was a shape. A large, roughly circular object, some 60 meters across, about 200 feet, twice the size of a football field, with edges and features that did not look, to the men watching, like anything natural. What happened next is a near-perfect illustration of how a deep-sea mystery is born, grows, and eventually collapses, and it makes a fitting end to any accounting of the deep's hold on the human mind. Because unlike every case before it, this one turned out to be no mystery at all, at least not in the way the world came to believe. The Ocean X team looked at their sonar image and saw something extraordinary. The shape appeared to have straight edges, unusual for a natural formation. In later descriptions, team members spoke of strange stair-like formations, of what looked like a structure rather than a rock. One of the team leaders remarked in an interview that if the thing was constructed, it must have been built tens of thousands of years ago, before the last ice age, an almost unimaginable antiquity. Others on the team would go further still, floating ideas that ranged from the remains of the lost city of Atlantis to something not of this world at all. The image itself is what set everything in motion, and it is worth understanding exactly what it showed, and, more importantly, what it did not. The sonar picture that the Ocean X team captured was a single, indistinct scan, low in resolution, the kind of rough acoustic image that seabed searching produces. In it, with the right eyes and the right expectations, one could make out a circular shape with features that suggested design. To a public, primed by decades of science fiction, the resemblance was immediate and irresistible. The object in the blurry image looked, to a great many people, like a crashed flying saucer sitting on the bottom of the sea. And once that comparison was made, once the words "sunken UFO" were attached to the image, the story took on a life entirely its own. The tabloid press seized on it. A British tabloid ran the story, and from there, it exploded across the internet and around the world. The shape acquired a name, the Baltic Sea Anomaly, and it became one of the most discussed underwater mysteries of its time. People pored over the sonar image, tracing its edges, convincing themselves they could see corridors, staircases, a landing gear, the architecture of something built. The team returned to the site the following year to to gather more detailed scans, and the story grew with each new detail they reported. some of them strange enough to fuel the wildest theories. The team described peculiar interferences at the site, claiming that their electrical equipment, including a satellite phone, stopped working when they were directly above the object, and only started working again once they had moved a couple of 100 meters away. To believers, this was thrilling confirmation, the sort of thing a downed alien craft might do, emitting some field that scrambled electronics. The founder of the team was quoted saying he was completely convinced they had found something very, very unique. For a stretch of time, the Baltic Sea anomaly occupied exactly the space that every deep-sea mystery occupies at its peak, the space between a real observation and a wished-for explanation. There was a genuine object on the seafloor. There was a real sonar image. And into the gap between that image and any confirmed understanding of it, the imagination poured everything it had: Atlantis, aliens, ancient impossible structures, a pre-Ice Age civilization. The story had all the ingredients: a remote and hidden location, a blurry piece of evidence that could be read many ways, a team making bold and cryptic statements, and a public more than willing to believe that the deep sea, so vast and so dark and so little explored, might finally have yielded up proof of the extraordinary. It was, for a while, a genuine phenomenon, with a worldwide following. Then science did what science does, and it did it quietly, without the drama that had carried the story so far. The Ocean X team had recovered rock samples from the site, and those samples were provided to a geologist at Stockholm University, an associate professor named Volker Bruchert. He analyzed what they had brought up, and the answer was almost disappointingly ordinary. The samples were granites, gneisses, and sandstones, the exact rock types one would expect to find in a glacial basin like the Baltic Sea. There was one piece of basaltic rock, hardened lava, which was slightly more unusual, but not in any way that pointed to the impossible. Bruchert explained that the whole northern Baltic region has been heavily shaped by glacial processes, by the advance and retreat and thawing of enormous ice sheets over vast spans of time, and that both the feature on the seafloor and the rock samples were most likely formed in connection with those glacial and post-glacial processes. In plain terms, the Baltic Sea anomaly was a glacial deposit, rock and sediment left behind, and arranged by the movement of ice long ago. Exactly the kind of feature the geology of the region produces. Other experts weighed in on the image itself, and their assessment was just as deflating to the legend. Seabed sonar specialists pointed out that the famous image was riddled with distortions and artifacts, the kind of noise and error that low-quality or improperly calibrated sonar equipment introduces into a scan. One expert from a leading oceanographic institution said the image had so many artifacts that it was difficult to interpret, and that no confidence should be placed in any reading of it until better processing was done with proper equipment. Another marine geologist made the point that the sonar image should essentially be disregarded, that it was too flawed to support the interpretations built on top of it. A scientist from another marine institute suggested the anomaly was likely a rock outcrop, or sediment dropped from a passing fishing trawler, or even, at a stretch, a school of fish, any of a number of mundane possibilities that a clear image would have distinguished, but a blurry one could not. The lesson buried in that technical detail is one of the most important in this entire journey, and it applies far beyond the Baltic. The kind of technology used to look at the seafloor has an enormous effect on how the images are interpreted. A low-resolution sonar scan, full of distortion, invites the eye to find patterns and structures that are not really there, because the human mind is relentlessly good at seeing shapes, faces, and designs in noise. Give a person a blurry image and a suggestion of what it might be, and they will find the corridors and staircases they are looking for. Modern, high-resolution seabed imaging can render the bottom of the sea in astonishing detail. And detail is exactly what kills a mystery like this, because detail replaces the ambiguity that the imagination needs to work. The Baltic Sea anomaly lived in the blur. It could not have survived a clear look. The mysterious electronic interference, the satellite phone that supposedly failed above the object, never received any confirmed technical explanation and was never independently verified. And it sits in the same category as so many of the eerie details attached to these stories. It may have had an ordinary cause, It may have been misremembered or overstated. What it was not was evidence of anything, because a single anecdote about equipment trouble, unverified and unexplained, proves nothing at all. It functioned in the story the way the unnatural cold functioned in the tale of the Orang Medan, as a chilling detail that made the account feel more real and more strange, without adding anything solid to the actual case. These details are the connective tissue of a legend, the touches that make it vivid, and they thrive precisely because they cannot be checked. It should be said fairly that the Ocean X team were not proven to be frauds, and the honest position is more nuanced than simply calling the whole thing a hoax. They were treasure hunters who found an unusual sonar return and pursued it, and along the way they made statements that ranged from cautious to sensational. The geological explanation is the consensus of the scientists who examined the evidence, and it is by far the most likely account of what the anomaly actually is. But the team continued to express belief that they had found something significant, lamented that they could not secure funding to investigate further, and the object was never subjected to the kind of comprehensive, high-resolution, independent study that would settle every last question beyond any possible doubt. That gap, small as it is enough for the legend to persist in some corners, and it is worth being precise about it. The overwhelming weight of expert analysis says the Baltic Sea anomaly is a natural glacial formation. It does not say that every person involved has accepted that, or that a definitive high-resolution survey has closed the book to universal satisfaction. The mystery, in the scientific sense, is resolved. The story, in the cultural sense, drifts on. That distinction between a resolved mystery and a surviving story is the heart of why the Baltic Sea anomaly makes such a fitting close. Because in almost every way, it is the mirror image of the case that came just before it. The giant and colossal squid were legends that turned out to be true, sailors' monsters confirmed by the camera, the impossible made real. The Baltic Sea anomaly was the opposite, a supposed proof of the impossible that turned out to be ordinary rock arranged by ancient ice. One legend was vindicated by evidence, the other was dissolved by it, and the difference between them came down entirely to what the evidence actually showed once it was examined properly. The squid was filmed, clearly, alive, verified by experts. The anomaly was a blur, distorted, and the moment real analysis was applied, it fell apart. The deep sea, in these two cases side by side, shows both of its faces, the one that hides genuine wonders and the one that hides nothing but our own willingness to see wonders that are not there. There is a deeper current running underneath the Baltic Sea anomaly, and it connects back to the very first case in this account, the bloop, and to every case in between. In each of these stories, the same pattern repeats. There is a real observation, a sound, a drifting ship, a wreck, a shape on the sonar, a creature glimpsed in the dark, and there is a gap, a stretch of time, or a lack of clear evidence, in which the true explanation is not yet known. And into that gap, without fail, the human mind pours its largest and most frightening or most thrilling possibility. A monster louder than a whale, a crew killed by an unknown horror, survivors banging on a sunken hull, a sunken alien craft. The imagination does not reach for the boring answer. It reaches for the extraordinary one, and it holds on to that answer with a conviction that the evidence rarely earns, right up until the moment that better evidence, or more patient science, arrives to close the gap. That is not a flaw to be ashamed of, exactly. It is the same impulse that drives exploration in the first place, the refusal to accept that the unknown is empty, the hope that something remarkable lies just beyond what we can currently see. It is what sent the Japanese team on scores of dives to find a living giant squid, and what sends explorers to the bottom of the deepest trenches. The willingness to imagine the extraordinary is bound up with the willingness to go and look, but it comes with a cost, and the Baltic Sea anomaly is the clearest possible example of that cost. When the imagination outruns the evidence, people believe things that are not true. Blurry images become alien ships, glacial rock becomes Atlantis, and the deep sea, which is genuinely full of real wonders, gets crowded with invented ones that distract from, and sometimes discredit, the true marvels sitting right beside them. The deep sea is the largest and least explored environment on our planet, and that single fact is the engine behind every mystery in this account. Only a fraction of the seafloor has been mapped in any detail. Vast reaches of the deep have never been seen by human eyes at all. Into that enormous darkness, humanity sends its instruments and, far more freely, its imagination. The instruments bring back the truth slowly, piece by piece. An icequake here, a glacial deposit there, a living squid filmed after a century of searching. The imagination fills the rest instantly, with monsters and ghost ships and sunken craft and civilizations lost before the Ice Age. And for a time, in the gap between what the instruments have confirmed and what remains dark, both live side by side, the real and the imagined, indistinguishable, until someone does the patient work of telling them apart. The Baltic Sea anomaly reminds us, at the end, to hold our wonder and our skepticism together, and not to let either one crowd out the other. The deep truly does hide extraordinary things. The colossal squid is real. The bloop was a real sound, even if a mundane one made it. The thresher and the titan, and the men on the Byford dolphin, and the divers at the blue holes are all real, and their stories are as strange and as terrible as any legend. There is no need to invent monsters and alien wrecks to make the deep sea frightening or fascinating, because it already is both, on the strength of what actually happens down there. But that same fascination, ungoverned, will find sunken saucers in blurry sonar scans and killer creatures in the sound of breaking ice, and it will believe in them with a passion the evidence never supports. The honest way to look into the deep is with eyes wide open to genuine wonder, and equally open to the plain, careful truth, willing to be amazed by the squid, and willing, in the very next breath, to see the anomaly for the ancient rock that it is. The little sonar image on the floor of the Gulf of Bothnia did what so much deep-sea evidence does. It showed a shape, and it left just enough room for the mind to fill in the rest. Millions of people looked at that blur and saw a craft that could not exist, resting in the dark, where no one could easily go and check. And the truth, when it came, was quieter than the story, and far older, a formation shaped by ice across spans of time longer than human civilization, sitting exactly where the geology of a glacier-carved region would put it, waiting on the seafloor, not as a message from another world, but as a record of this one, of the enormous slow forces that made the sea and the land alike. The deep did not hide a wonder there. It hid a mirror, and what people saw in it was mostly themselves, their hopes and their fears, projected onto the dark. That is where every one of these mysteries finally leads, back to the same enormous, dark, indifferent water, and to the human mind that cannot stop trying to read it. The sea keeps its answers a long time. It gives them up slowly, or not at all, and in the waiting, we tell ourselves stories, some of them true, some of them not, all of them shaped by the same deep need to know what lies below. The ocean does not tell those stories. It simply holds what it holds, in the cold and the dark and the crushing weight, and lets us wonder, which in the end may be the most unsettling thing about the deep sea of all. It is right here, covering most of our own world, and we have barely looked, and it is not waiting to answer us. It is not waiting at all. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.